Resumes and we welcome the Assistant Minister for Trade and Future Made in Australia, Senator the Honourable Tim Ayres, representing the Treasurer. Welcome, Minister.
Thank you.
And we resume with Treasury Markets Group, and I'm going to Senator Bragg.
Thanks very much. Now, earlier we had an exchange about the debanking issue. Now, there was a CFR report which you referred. So the CFR report was commissioned by the former government, and this government responded to it, didn't they?
Yes, that would be right.
Yeah, do you have the date?
Sorry.
2023 maybe?
June 2023.
23, yeah.
That was when the report was released.
And which, was it the Treasurer or the Financial Services Minister?
The Treasurer received the report
Treasurer.
From the CFR.
Treasurer. Okay, because I've found it was a very good idea to have the CFR do this piece of work, actually. And I'm sure they did a good job. So it says here the government agrees to the recommendation around data collection. That was recommendation 1. It says here Treasury will work with APRA and the 4 major banks to design and scope the voluntary data collection to ensure the data collected is useful and the process is iterative. So your answer before was that there was no data. My question is there really no data?
The government agreed to the recommendation. In terms of the actual data, so APRA would be the recipient of that data. We could take on notice whether APRA have actually received that data as yet.
So either way, APRA would be collecting the data at the front end.
Yep. Yes, Senator.
But you're not aware of any data in a day-to-day sense that you've seen?
Not personally, but I mean APRA collect a lot of data from the banking sector.
Sure, but I mean the government response from the Treasurer was that the Treasury will work with APRA. So it doesn't sound like much has happened.
Oh, sorry, that's not my evidence. My evidence is just that APRA would be the recipient of the data, and so I couldn't talk to what they've received as yet.
Okay, let's go to recommendation 2. Do you have this information handy?
Oh, we've got some briefing points.
You've got some outline. I just want to make sure I'm not talking to myself here. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Then recommendation 2 is transparency and fairness measures.
Yes.
So we discussed this before, and I think your evidence was the expectation is that the bank will try and explain why they're not going to provide banking services. Mm-hmm. Is that the fair characterisation?
Yes. The government would provide guidance. The government advised the major 4 banks to provide guidance on their risk tolerance and requirements, so that members of the relevant industries understood that and understood what they would be looking for in terms of the provision of banking services.
So has this happened?
The government advised the banks. The government did make that public statement to the banks.
And what's your sense of how it's gone?
I could take that question on notice in terms of have we analysed the quality of the guidance provided by the major banks.
Do you think debanking is still an issue?
I think debanking is an important issue for different parts of society, and again, I note that the main reasons for debanking highlighted by the CFR report was anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism financing risks, sanctions, corruption, modern slavery, reputation risk, frauds and scams, and they're all very serious issues.
Okay. Well, I think we'll need your information on notice because it's not clear to me. I mean, is there a measure that the government is deploying to determine whether its communications to banks have been successful?
No, we can take those questions on notice.
Okay, my sense is it is still an issue. My sense is still a real issue. So we look forward to that. Can I ask, so who is Minister Jones? Has he gone to the Finance Minister's meeting?
In South Africa?
Yeah.
Yes, he has.
Okay, when is he back?
Oh, I don't have that to hand, Senator. That's managed through our international area.
Yeah, okay. Can I just clear up one more thing on this pesky data issue? Did you say before that there was no data on the debanking issue? There's been no new data collected since 2022.
Oh, sorry, I said I personally wasn't aware of no data. Given that APRA would be the recipient of that data, that doesn't mean there hasn't been data collected.
Okay, thanks for clearing that up. I think that's it.
I think Senator O'Neill had a question from Markets Group, which I'd asked her to put on notice just for a time, but given that you've come back, Senator O'Neill.
Thank you very much. So earlier today I was asking about the practices of Treasury and dealing with market-sensitive information, and I was directed to ask the question at Markets. So my questions earlier this morning were about the role that Mr Gretsch, who was a Principal Advisor in the Corporations and Financial Services Division, revealed through his emails about sending information about the Australian Business Investment Partnership to his colleagues. So I think you understand the scale of the kind of behaviour that I'm talking about. Could you talk me through now what your processes are about dealing with market-sensitive information and what the protocols are around informing key people? Clearly there's ERC, the ministers, but then there would be other parliamentarians from the government side, but also opposition, perhaps crossbench parliamentarians that might be briefed about certain things. What do you do to protect market-sensitive information that you're dealing with all the time in terms of Treasury?
Thank you, Senator. A lot of the evidence that was given by my colleague, Ms Anderson, earlier today is on point with the way we manage this kind of material. Material internally to Treasury, so within our own staff, we have confidentiality obligations upon our own staff. The Code of Conduct requires we maintain that confidence, whether that is because it's commercially sensitive or cabinet in confidence or in that nature. If we to consult externally on commercially confidential things, and that would be more, so it's less likely that we're going to use somebody else's commercially confidential information and give it to a third party externally. It's more in the category that we're consulting on something that is market sensitive in the sense that it might give an advantage if somebody does something with it, and to that extent we will have confidentiality regimes around that material when it's given to those parties. Where they're breached, we'll raise that with those parties. So, for example, Mr Dixon gave evidence about the PwC matters earlier. In that that's the kind of circumstance that we'd be worried about. I haven't personally briefed opposition or crossbench or other parliamentarians with market-sensitive information, but I'd expect the same limitations will apply, both for ensuring that information is properly looked after and considered, but also if it goes to a particular organisation that has continuous disclosure obligations, then that's had regard to. So that might be an exchange of information outside of market hours so that the parties can be aligned properly for when the market reopens the following day. I might just turn to my colleagues, so if there's anything they'd say further on that with our consultations. Yeah.
So they're pretty solid processes. Clearly, they rely on the ethical muscle of the individuals who sign a confidentiality agreement, and we saw where that failed with Mr Peter John Collins with regard to PwC and its interaction. Given how much market-sensitive information was being fed by Mr Gretsch, to many members of the Liberal Party, as documented in the Privileges Committee report and the 3 volumes of documents published by the committee. Could you indicate if your processes are robust enough to prevent that kind of behaviour currently?
So I'll caveat this. I was not in Treasury when Mr Gretsch and those matters took place. I was some other departments away. What you're talking about there is an APS officer who has actively disclosed information that's of a confidence outside of the course of their duties. That I'd expect would raise serious concerns for us as a breach of the code of conduct and would warrant an investigation as to what they were doing there. So I believe the processes within Treasury are robust enough, and in other departments where I've had to deal with sensitive information, to prevent that or to punish it if it takes place.
Okay, thank you. So the IT systems, when called upon within Treasury, are able to identify these emails that I've read into the record today by Mr Gretsch. You have oversight of all of those sorts of communications.
Oh, our corporate area would be the best to answer that question, Senator.
Okay. In this circumstance, in response to your articulation that you would unlikely brief the opposition.
Oh no, not that I haven't briefed the opposition. Is my evidence. It's not. If asked to, I would, and our officers do. Officers at the table have in recent days on particular policy items.
Okay, all right. So if it was market-sensitive information, we have a transcript of Mr Turnbull talking to a radio station declaring that he was briefed 3 hours before the announcement of the Australian Business Investment Partnership. Would that be common practice in your view, Mr Phillip?
For Treasury officers to brief the opposition?
Yes.
When asked, we do. And we might be asked by, it'd be asked by the officers, our relevant Treasury ministerial officers, to brief the opposition on particular points.
And the protection around market sensitivity, because this would be time-sensitive matters that could impact share prices, for example, how would you mitigate the risk there?
So we would, we're in the world of hypotheticals here, but one mitigation that you might use in that circumstance is to ensure that briefing on information that might be sensitive to the market takes place outside of the market hours, so that it can't be acted upon quickly. So in previous roles that I've had, where we are briefing on matters sensitive to company information that relates to a company, that briefing might occur outside of market hours so that everybody has the same information when market opens the next day, rather than there being an imbalance of that information in the marketplace that enables things to happen.
Excellent. And that, as I indicated before, relies on your personal integrity and the system integrity, but malign individuals could abuse that information and potentially send it to anyone at considerable risk to themselves, which is how Mr Gretsch described his permanence in Treasury, at considerable risk to myself, he had in a parenthetic statement. What are the risks if you were caught sharing information broadly with the opposition of the current government while you were working in Treasury? What are the consequences?
Well, if it's an authorised disclosure, of course, there are no consequences. If it is authorised, so we've been asked to have that conversation, then so be it. If it's an unauthorised disclosure, much like Ms Anderson referred to earlier today, the sanctions under the Code of Conduct range from everything from an investigation and a finding with no sanction right through to dismissal. And that'd be a matter for the investigating officers and then the sanctions delegate under the Code of Conduct.
And have there been recent breaches of the APS code of people using insider information?
That'd be a question for my corporate area, Senator. I mean, our corporate area runs those types of investigations and those types of HR concerns. That'd be best to answer that question.
And the standards that you've been referring to are across the entire APS?
Yes.
Yes. So they would apply to the ABS as well, Australian Bureau of Statistics?
Yes.
Thank you.
We done.
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. That concludes the questions that we have for Markets Group, and you go with our thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma.
The committee welcomes representatives from the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. Would take a very brief recess while you come to the table. Committee resumes, and we welcome Ms Cascott-Leib, the Chair of the ACCC. Welcome back to Senate Estimates. And we welcome representatives from the ACCC. Thank you very much for providing the committee with your opening statement, which I will, as per procedure, table. Did you want to give perhaps an abridged version of that, or are you happy for us to just table it?
I'm happy for you to table it, and we will be interested and ready to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Deputy Chair.
Thank you very much. On the 11th of December 2024, the ACCC issued a draft determination proposing to grant authorisation with conditions to allow the ABA, major banks, major retailers and supermarkets, Australia Post and other industry participants to be part of the future of cash in transit services. So what is the next step in relation to this determination?
We have been receiving submissions. We are hearing both from the participants and which includes the banks, so the funding parties, so the banks, the retailers and Armaguard. And we are then considering those submissions. They are raising questions including in relation to an appropriate pricing model. And we are also seeking to ensure that we get information and material from regional rural groups, small businesses, and we are very conscious, and we have made clear to the parties that we do want to see the continuation of access to cash broadly, not solely in larger metropolitan areas.
Were there any issues with the approval of the merger of Armaguard and Procedure?
Firstly, we looked very carefully because it was in terms of large national participants merger to monopoly.
Yeah.
We imposed a 3-year undertaking which still has over sort of 1 year and a number of months to go. A 3-year undertaking which required the continuation of the services that were provided at that time on the terms provided at that time, with a capacity for a capped price increase. They're the core terms, Senator. There are other terms, including that if assets deployed in the business were to be shut down, such as depots and other assets, that they would be put on a register so that smaller regional providers, if they wish to expand, would also be able to offer to acquire those assets.
Okay, so these were the conditions you imposed on the merger, though, aren't they?
That is correct. And that applies to the merged entity, which is owned 30% by Proseca, 70% by Armaguard.
So has there been a subsequent investigation into Armaguard's conduct and interaction with the ACCC, including the statements it gave to the Commission?
There is an independent auditor of their compliance with the undertaking. We receive regular reports in relation to that. If concerns are raised with us as to compliance, we investigate them. In terms of the question about how rapidly the state of the business is represented as deteriorating, we are aware of the evidence of significant declines in cash use. So we do know there are certainly factors applying that are relevant. We do always approach statements that are made to us with some degree of appropriate regulatory scepticism, and do wish to see a verification of them.
So, is there further compliance? Are they facing additional obligations that have been imposed in addition to the original conditions placed on the new entity?
There are not additional conditions at this time.
Right.
They continue to be subject to the conditions under the first undertakings. One of the powers we have in relation to authorisations, if we consider it necessary in the public interest, so authorisation applications, is to impose conditions. So that is one other capacity we have once we have continued the submission process that we have before us.
Submissions from stakeholders?
Correct.
Right. And how long will that process, is there a timetable for that process, or is it open-ended?
There is a timetable for the process. In terms of the industry initiatives and business continuity measures, we are expecting to issue a draft determination this month.
A draft determination, which could form additional enforcement or compliance measures
Yes.
on Armaguard?
So apparently that depends which one we're looking at, actually. So in relation to the funding parties, the final determination will be March. There are a series of there is a business continuity measures one which doesn't include Armaguard, but since thank you very much. Our interim CEO has noted to me that this one with the funding parties is the final in March 2025. Right. And yes, it could include additional conditions. One of the aspects we required with the interim was that their authorisation was that there needed to be a sufficient consultation across the breadth of the relevant stakeholders, including covering rural and regional areas.
Are you able to give any sense of the general, is there a particular concern that a lot of the stakeholders have about Armaguard, or would there be an overall theme of concern that you could share with the committee?
The overall areas that we are concerned about relate to continued sustainable provision, achieving efficiency without unpredictable changes.
Okay. Have you, I don't mean this personally, but has the ACCC sent officials to inspect any of the Armagard premises?
Let me check that. I can see Mr. Lohner's on the screen, who is the head of our mergers and exemptions relevant division. Let me check that.
Tom Lohner, Executive General Manager of the Mergers, Exemptions and Digital Division. During the Prosegur Armagard merger consideration, we did hire an expert accountant who went through a lot of the documents to check the financial status of those companies. Whether they actually went to the premises, I'm not sure. I could take that on notice. Quite often on merger reviews, the staff of the ACCC will visit the sites. That's to check, things like equipment and the capital assets of the entity. I can confirm it on notice, but from my recollection is that yes, there was a site visit to look at cash depots on that matter to inspect them, and that helps with the assessment of the competition issues.
Okay. Well, just finally then, Chair, is the ACCC looking at Armagard in the context of any other investigations?
So we have, in addition, authorisations related to business continuity measures, which are solely by the ABA, its member banks and the Consumer-Owned Banking Association, in case or to be prepared with business continuity measures if Armagard were to fail. So that we also have underway. And another relating to consolidating industry initiatives and business continuity measures. We have investigated the question of whether there were concerns about compliance with the conditions of the undertakings. We engaged closely with Armagard in that respect. We are not currently, do not currently have others underway.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator McKim.
Thanks, Chair. Can I check you can hear me okay?
We do have you there, Senator McKim.
Terrific, thanks, and good evening, Ms Cascott-Lieb and your colleagues from the ACCC. Thanks for joining us. You've previously provided answers to a question on notice around the contributions and withdrawals of East Coast gas exporters from to and from the domestic gas market. Thanks for providing that important information. I've just got some follow-up questions. Firstly, you provided a table in that question on notice, headed Queensland LNG producers' net contributions to the East Coast gas market. Could you just talk the committee through, please, how you define export gas and domestic gas for the purpose of creating those figures? And I guess I'm wondering if the way you arrive at some of those figures is just basically adding up all the volume in export contracts and then subtracting the contracted amount from projected production levels. Is that the way you arrive at those figures?
Thanks very much, Senator McKim. So the answer that we provided looked to the extent of the information and data that the LNG producers had provided to the ACCC, looked to their contracted sales under LNG contracts from an export point of view. Also looked at the extent of purchases.
Okay, thanks.
And the purchases that they
so
had.
So firstly, did you have visibility provided to you by the companies?
We did. We used mandatory information collection powers.
All right, thank you. So that gave you certainty around the contracted amounts. Is that accurate?
It is, yes, it is. And they provide them on a forecast basis and then subsequently on an actual basis.
Okay, so to arrive at the line at the bottom of the table, the net contribution figures, which I know are all negative in the table that you've provided, you take the contracted amounts and do you subtract those contracted amounts from the projected production of East Coast gas? Or is it more complicated than that?
It's more complicated than that. One of the key elements we are seeking to prove in that table is that they extract gas also from third-party suppliers who would otherwise be domestic suppliers of gas, so that they extract a level of their own gas reserves, but that they also contract, and which is the reference in the table, Senator, to the third-party gas, that they also contract to acquire gas from other domestic producers of gas, and we treat that as a negative contribution because they not only extract and supply in LNG their own production, but also other third-party sources of gas, which is then liquefied in their plants and exported.
All right, thank you. The figures that you provided, I don't believe they, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe they include sales that are made via the spot market. Is that accurate?
It is accurate, but for the next question that you will ask, Senator, I'm going to pass to the head of our infrastructure division, Nicole Ross, because she will be able to answer that question.
Thanks, Ms Ross. So I'm just after whether you have any visibility over how much gas is made available to via the mechanism of the spot market, either historically or projected.
Thank you, Senator McKim. Can I just clarify that your question relates to the domestic spot markets or short-term trading markets on the east coast of Australia?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So we do have some visibility of those contributions into the domestic short-term markets. That is information that is collected by the Australian Energy Market Regulator and reported in a mix of information by the Energy Regulator and also the Energy Market Operator. We work closely with both agencies to understand information, but my understanding is most of the information that is published by those agencies is de-identified.
Okay, and would the numbers in the table that I was just discussing with Ms Castott, would they change if you factored in gas sold on the domestic spot market?
They may do, Senator. So our calculations are based on our visibility of domestic longer-term supply agreements that the LNG producers enter into.
All right. Would you be able to either in real time or on notice provide an updated version of that table that factored in gas sold on the spot market?
I'm happy to take it on notice, Senator. We'll look to see what information we can provide. As we've discussed, it is not information the ACCC collects itself.
Yeah, all right, thanks. Is there an export spot market as well as a domestic spot market for gas?
There is.
There is. Do you have visibility over that, particularly in terms of quantities?
We do have visibility, Senator, over the volumes of gas that the Australian LNG producers are exporting over to overseas or international spot markets. So we ask them to provide the volumes that they supply.
Okay, and thank you. And that's separate to the contracted amounts that are exported?
Correct.
It's additional.
Yeah, all right. Could I ask you to take on
to
notice? Yes, thank you. Additional to them. Thank you. Could I also ask you to take on notice whether you can provide an updated version of that table that factors in both export and gas sold on both export and domestic spot markets and disaggregated? In other words, a version of that table that factors in gas sold on the domestic spot market, version that factors in gas sold on the export spot market, and then perhaps a version that captures both of those things together, the export spot market and the domestic spot market.
To the extent we can, Senator, I would note that overseas export spot cargoes are often decided at a relatively short notice period, so they may not be counted in those forecasts out to 2035.
Yeah, okay, thanks. And over time, as domestic gas is exported in greater volumes, would you, this may be an unfair question, and if it is, please just tell me, but over time, as domestic gas is exported in greater volume, would you normally expect, all other things being equal, that spot market sales would decrease, domestic spot market sales would decrease?
On a supply and demand basis, we would, Senator, because where there is less gas available on such a basis, then yes, we would expect so. The periods when we saw high proportion of sales in spot markets, for example, were periods such as when there was excess production of gas unable to be processed in the LNG plants, and also when there was ramp gas before there was a capacity with the trains to take. So in essence, it was periods when there was more gas available than was being part of the export cargoes.
Thank you. Santos's Gladstone LNG terminal has contracted to sell more gas than they can actually produce. If that's the case, would Australian consumers pay higher prices and effectively absorb the risk of some of those decisions because there's less gas in the domestic market?
The ACCC certainly, throughout our recent reports, been concerned to see the availability of a sufficient amount of gas from the LNG projects to be available for supply on the east coast of Australia, both to meet demand, and there is quite a variability in gas-powered generation plants needed to be met, so to meet demand and also to deliver a reasonable price of supply.
Okay, and if there's, in the case where there is less gas available in the domestic market, would that result in an increase in prices for consumers of that gas, domestic consumers?
In usual market conditions, yes, Senator. One of the aspects that is being discussed in the sector currently is whether, with the diminishing supply of gas in the southern reserves, whether there may be a need for there to be import terminals to bring international gas into the east coast of Australia.
So we've contracted so much gas for export that the industry is now looking at importing gas to make up the shortfall. Is that right?
It is one more flexible option. There is expected to be increased supply over time, including from the Middle East, with an expansion of fields and production there. So it is one possibility.
That is extraordinary. Late in the last decade, I think it was around 2017, competition authorities in Japan pushed for the removal of destination clauses so that an oversupplied Japan could on-sell surplus gas to Europe or Southeast Asia. Gas contracts were duly renegotiated. Do you think if the Australian government made its displeasure of some of the contracts clear, that there is any scope for contracts that cover the export of Australian gas to be renegotiated so that we can actually reduce our looming gas shortfall and therefore put downward pressure on prices for consumers?
We are aware there are foundation contracts with major purchasers in both Japan and Korea who are important trading partners. And we have not ever contemplated a capacity to influence or change the terms of such contracts. What we do see as an important opportunity for a policy consideration is that during the 2030s, a number of the foundation contracts do reach their term. And we see as a more plausible commercial situation would be the consideration of different approaches to apply to the proportion that would be available for East Coast consumption, which would still be a small proportion actually of the resources and reserves. That is where we are at this time putting focus in our reports, that opportunity at that point when the current forecasts are showing concern for sufficiency of gas from late in this decade.
Senator McKim, I'd like to share the call, but did you have a final question or can I share the call?
Unusually for me, Chair, you've intervened right when I was done, so if I could just thank Ms Cass-Gottlieb and her colleagues for their engagement on that issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator McKim. I'm sure other colleagues will follow your lead on that approach. Senator McDonald.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I take your guidance on that. Good evening, Ms Cass-Gottlieb. Nice to see you.
So good to see you too.
Just following on from the questions that you've just had, is another factor that the ACCC is considering in the gas shortage in the southern states the Victorian Labor government's policies on not encouraging or even allowing additional gas exploration onshore in that state?
We have been recommending, Senator, for a number of reports that any mandatory moratorium in a number of states be lifted so that there could be a proposal by proposal consideration to enable new supply in the southern states which are facing quite significant supply shortfalls.
Based on the ACCC's current projections, what new additional gas supply are you projecting will come online in the next 2 years?
there are some additional levels of supply. Well, I will see if Ms Ross can find them, and if we can't, we will come back to you. We do forecast additional sources of supply that have also been proposed to government as part of the process for conditional exemptions from the mandatory gas code. However, at this time, we're not forecasting that they meet demand from 2028 on.
We're asking previously, you're getting asked some questions on the domestic spot market. I'm wondering, do you have visibility not just of what is sold on the domestic market, but what is offered? Do you have data on that?
We do have data on what is offered in terms of supply in contracts before it's agreed. And so we do have data on supply offered. I don't believe we have data on what is put into the by a producer into the short-term market, though.
That would, Senator McDonald, Nicole Ross, Executive General Manager, Infrastructure Division. That would be data collected by the Australian Energy Regulator, published by the Australian Energy Market Operator as well.
Thank you.
And it may be de-identified.
Thank you. Has the federal government advised...
Perhaps I would like to, I'm just checking here. So in the first half of 2024, when we were looking at compliance with the heads of agreement by the LNG producers and found that they did comply, we found that they offered 49.2 petajoules to the domestic market, of which 22.1 was supplied.
It's an important point. What has the federal government advised you is the action that they have taken to encourage states to lift mandatory restrictions?
I'm not aware we have been advised in that nature, Senator.
No? Do you factor in approval delays? And if so, how have approval delays impacted on your previous projections?
We have taken into account the projections that we give are based upon the producers' own projections to us of their estimates of when they are going to be able to bring gas into production, so to market. So it is using their estimates on approvals. We have made recommendations pointing out the problem caused by lengthy approval times.
So has the federal government satisfied you that they have the policies and approvals in place to ensure that there are no gas shortages by 2028?
We are aware of both the policy relating to bringing an overall management of gas, also the recommendation that there should in effect be a gas overall system program in the manner in which there is for electricity, and we have strongly supported that there should be new overall system, both forecast and programmed, to bring more gas to market.
Thank you. Just to change gears, when you use your mandatory information access powers, what commitments do you give to the security of that information? What are your obligations?
So we receive the information from producers and from the parties, subject to confidentiality obligations. We then go through processes of consultation before information is produced and published. We do have an overriding capacity under the relevant power that, after considering, and we consult closely and we take much time to do so, that if a party producing information has submitted that it is competitively sensitive, we are still have a power, if we are satisfied it's in the public interest to publish it. But we do a very careful process. We frequently listen to submissions and make amendments to what we propose to publish, but if we consider it is important for the public to know and to inform policy deliberations, we do have the power still to publish.
Okay. With reference to paragraph 3 on page 89 of the Treasury Portfolio Budget Statement, it states the ACCC and AER share staff, resources and facilities. Can you tell me what data gas producers are required to share with the ACCC that is different to the data that they are required to share with the AER?
At this time, the AER is separately gathering data that is relevant to its wholesale functions, and it gathers it directly. I will just check with Ms Ross if there are other aspects we should add to there.
No, that is correct, Chair.
So I want to ask you what efforts are being made to standardise the data that the various government agencies are required to collect from gas producers. What is the progress, the timelines, and who is leading this?
We have been working with the AER, AEMO and the Department of DQ in order to climate change, environment and water. We have been working with each of them to look at the various sets of data to seek to ensure that, firstly, the parties aren't subject to information burdens all at the same time, but also to streamline the data. We do, and we have made real strides. We still need to do more in relation to this.
That is certainly the feedback that I'm getting, is the onerous nature of the data collection, what's required and the different timeframes that require additional staff in businesses to comply just with data reporting, not with production or something else that's productive to the business. Given staff are shared between the ACCC and the AER, what is the current level of ASLs dedicated to compliance, collation, analysis and publication of the data required from gas producers? I'll pause there. Do you have that
we
data?
will need to take that on notice.
Okay. Could I also ask for a comparison for each of the last 3 financial years of that information? And is there a breakdown of what percentage of these staffing resources are between AER and the ACCC, please?
We can do that, and we will do that.
Thank you. I'm aware of instances involving the ACCC and AER sending commercially sensitive data to the wrong company, including instances of data being accidentally shared with the company's competitors. Is the ACCC aware of instances too?
We are aware of a small number of inadvertent instances, yes, and we have, as soon as we became aware, we required all data that had been inadvertently and incorrectly shared to be deleted.
Does the ACCC routinely advise the Treasurer or any other ministers of such breaches?
We do collect that information, Senator, and I believe there is aggregated corporate reporting on those instances.
To the Treasurer or other ministers?
I would have to check, Senator, but we do collect that data.
Thank you. Given the ACCC...
Senator, one other thing that is important. on the few occasions this has occurred, we then conduct a review to learn the lesson from the way in which we need to improve systems.
Yeah, well done. Given the ACCC and AER share staff and resources, is it correct that the ACCC would be aware of each time a breach occurred under either authority?
Senator, it's Sarah Proudfoot, Interim Chief Executive Officer. We do, as Ms Cascott-Lieb said, after any of these information disclosures, have a process whereby the staff write up a report about what's happened. That comes to our Data and Information Security Committee so that it can be considered, and as Ms Cascott-Lieb said, lessons learned. So as a general rule, yes, that would be the case.
So you would be aware of something that's happened behind the Chinese wall in the AER section?
As I said, yes, generally that would be the case. I'm aware, for example, of recent instances where we've learned about those because we do look to learn from one another as well.
Thank you. Does the ACCC or AER formally record each time it breached commercially sensitive data, to whom it was breached and the details of the breach?
Yes.
Without seeking the names of the companies that had their commercial data breached, for each instance, can you provide information on each occasion data was inappropriately shared with a competitor? The type of data that was shared, I'm assuming you'll take this on notice, the type of data that was shared, how you advised the company whose data was breached, how you ensured that the data was not misused, and finally, how and when you rectified the internal processes to ensure safeguards are in place to ensure no further breaches.
Yes.
Thank you.
Senator.
Over what period are you asking for that, Senator?
Well, this reporting process was only instituted relatively recently, so from the beginning of that reporting process, which I think would be about 2 years now.
I think that's right, under the new powers, yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Has the ACCC or AER received formal complaints from gas companies relating to commercially sensitive information being shared with competitors? And to whom at the ACCC are these complaints elevated?
I'm actually not aware of formal complaints of that nature. I believe we have become aware either where we have identified it or a recipient has identified it and then told us, and we have then acted.
Right.
That is a recipient who knew they should not have received it.
Yes. It's very honourable of them.
Yes.
Very nice.
Senator McDonald, we do have
Last
some
question?
time. Senator McDonald, yeah.
Thank you very much. So I'll just ask you to take that on notice, just to check that there have not been formal complaints, just to put a bow on that. Given the ACCC's charter is to ensure competition, is it correct that the inappropriate sharing of commercially sensitive data actually works contrary to competition? And if so, to what degree does the ACCC estimate competition has been compromised by its inappropriate sharing of commercially sensitive information?
I think that this is de minimis, Senator, though we will pull the data and we'll give you the answers. But given the very significant quantities of data we have obtained, and that I have a reasonable knowledge of the number of these incidents because they are reported to me and I note them and I'm concerned about them. I believe there's a very small number. However, when we get the data together and we share it with you, you will form your own view.
Thank you. So just to turn back to the government's policies and recommendations to avoid the shortage in 2028, is it reasonable for me to assume then that the ACCC would not forecast a gas shortage from 2028 if the ACCC was satisfied that the government had the policies in place to avoid that?
there are a range of factors that are important in this period. One is that the LNG producers do supply domestically and transported to southern states uncontracted gas. That is gas that is not subject to the long-term contract supply. That will assist. It will not be enough, but it will assist. Retaining gas in storage from previous periods will also assist, and in addition, bringing on, though that will take some time, bringing on additional supplies is also an important contribution.
So they're government policies.
I should say in relation to that, I mean, one of the key things that will determine whether gas supplies is sufficient to meet demand, of course, is considering the demand side of the equation. And if Mr Dutton were to become the Prime Minister, if Mr Dutton were to become the Prime Minister, I think
just ridiculous.
I think I get to answer questions without being
the minister's only
shouted over by some. It's an unfortunate thing. So one of the good things for you that would happen if Mr Dutton was to become Prime Minister would be you get to answer questions, but I get to answer questions at the moment.
The gas
if Mr Dutton was to become the Prime Minister, of course,
Senator
I'll wait till I get the call, Chair.
Senator McDonald, well, okay, hang on. The minister's been here listening to answers from the chair. The minister is allowed to answer questions. You're worried about the time he's taking, but your interjections don't assist because you know that he is able to answer questions that are put. Right. And I think that's what he is doing. And when he is finished doing that, I'll go to Senator Rennick. Minister.
Thank you. Of course, if Mr Dutton were to become Prime Minister and this $600 billion nuclear reactor plan were to commence, of course, much more gas would be required, much more than peaking, to fill the gap from more unplanned outages from coal-fired power stations falling apart all over the country. If you're really concerned about making sure that there was sufficient demand, that demand and supply matched up in the gas market, you would not be engaging in a big publicly funded picking losers exercise for nuclear reactors. That is a complete disaster for the energy market in Australia. It leads to more incoherent outcomes. I will leave alone, though, your previous question about the importance of dealing with market-sensitive information properly, because it's far too tempting. Given what's been revealed about Mr Dutton's behaviour over the last couple of days.
So can I raise a point of order? Sorry, I have a point of order, Chair.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I haven't raised a point of order all day. But Senator Estimate, this is an institution we're all trying to respect, and this is about senators asking questions to departments. The minister wants to make a political speech. I get that, but he's been going for over a minute, and I think Senator Rennick has questions to the officials.
The minister's entitled to conclude his answer, which I suspect he was just about to do.
I have concluded. It's a new development in Senate estimates to have old stopwatch Sam over here, but if that's going to happen, I'm looking forward to it. I'll engage in it as a competitive exercise and try and get longer, Senator Bragg. If don't encourage me, encourage me.
All right, it is an unusual turn of events. Senator Rennick.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, guys. How are you going?
Good to see you.
Look, when I was in the supermarket inquiry, I was surprised to hear from horticulturalists who said they had to sign non-disclosure agreements with Coles and Woolworths. And is that legal? Are you allowed to? Because, I mean, I grew up on the farm. I'm used to going to cattle sales. There's a, Eastern Cattle Market Index. There's a Wool Market Index. How is it that Coles and Woolworths could silence put NDAs on horticulturalists? Step one. That's the first question. And then I note that there's a collective bargaining exemption so that businesses with aggregated turnover of less than 10 million are exempt from collective bargaining laws. is that the correct interpretation of that particular section? It's section 95A of the Competition and Consumer Act 2010.
So I'll start with the non-disclosure agreements. So the ACCC is currently very close to concluding our final report,
right,
which will be delivered to government by the 28th of December, so shortly. I'm not in a position to comment on the final report, but it was clear in the interim report that one of the many concerns that were raised with us were by suppliers, including farmers, relating to unequal bargaining power, and the manner of a range of aspects relating to contracting, and we will address a number of those aspects in detail in the final report. In terms of the collective bargaining exemption, you are right that for small businesses that come under the relevant level, they can notify so that they, and once they've notified and we're satisfied, then they are exempt from the collective, in effect from the prohibition on parties who are competitive engaging in collective boycotting or
sure,
so that they can negotiate together.
Okay, because I guess, I mean, I know these I checked Woolworths accounts out the other day. They've got about a 65 billion in turnover. I know that's not all to do with horticulture, but I would have thought there's a pretty uneven playing field between, say, small farmers, some of whom horticulturists might sort of sell more than $10 million worth of produce, but when you've only got a 1 or 2% margin and throwing the other stuff out, you're not making a lot of money. Is that something you think that's a bit on the low side, given that Woolworths and Coles make billions in turnover?
So
I mean, it's a case-by-case basis, but...
I understand. So firstly, our final report will certainly look in a lot of detail at the question of the position of suppliers and small suppliers and a range of suppliers. There is a capacity to come to the ACCC for authorisation for participants who wish to collectively bargain, who are larger than and don't come within that notification requirement. So that is the way that we do assist. And for instance, in relation to, we have this week authorised a group of Catholic hospitals in order to collectively negotiate with private health insurers.
Oh, right, yep.
And that was an authorisation, not a notification, because the hospitals together were above that level.
Sure. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I think that concludes questions we have for the ACCC. The committee is scheduled to take a 10-minute break, so I'll propose... Did you have questions?
I might do. I'm just checking with the Deputy Chair whether he... I've been liaising with everyone, so yeah, cool. Yep.
We could just go to 8:15 and then...
One, if I may, a very quick one. And you may not be able to provide an answer to the question, but are you in a position to provide an update to the committee on the craveable brands matter?
I have got something here. It is 21.
Catch up in the break.
Apart from the meetings that we had described in the November estimates, we have received upwards of 40 reports since relating to the concerns of the conduct. The matters that are raised with us concern allegations, concerns of unfair contracting terms and contraventions of the franchising code, and a view raised in the 40 reports of concerns that the actions taken as a whole, amount to a pattern of conduct that causes significant damage to Australian businesses. We are continuing to investigate and to obtain the relevant information and evidence relating to those reports.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Smith. Thank you very much, as always, Ms Cascott-Lieb and the team at the ACCC. That concludes the questions we have for you. You go with our thanks. The committee will take a 10-minute break. For those who are waiting patiently at the back, we'll try and provide some guidance about the program and how it's proceeding. We are behind time, and we'll resume at 8:21 p.m. The committee resumes, and before I welcome our next witnesses, the committee's met during the course of the break to try to assist moving the program forward. The committee is in a position to release the Australian Bureau of Statistics and the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman. The committee now welcomes representatives of APRA, and we welcome you, Mr Lonsdale and team. Were you happy to proceed to questions, or were there any opening remarks that you'd like to give?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, committee, for being here. We do have an opening statement. I'm happy just to table it, which I understand you've got, and proceed straight to questions.
We will come and collect your opening statement, or we'll circulate your opening statement, and we'll table it. And we'll go to the Deputy Chair, Senator Bragg.
Thanks very much. I just have some quick questions to do with the best financial interest duty. The super fund CBUS spent $370,000 on a birthday party for itself. It hired the Regent Theatre in Melbourne and invited a number of its best friends, including union officials, politicians and the like. Would that pass the best financial interest duty?
I'll ask Ms Cole to answer that, Senator, and talk to you about how we view the BFIT.
So yes, Margaret Cole, Deputy Chair of APRA. Well, Senator, that indeed is a matter that we have under inquiry. As you will know from announcements we have made recently, we placed some licence conditions on CBUS last year, requiring them to have an independent third party look at certain issues. Those issues went to the subject of fitness and propriety of directors and also certain expenditure payments. That matter was reported on by Deloitte, and the consequence of that has been that we have now entered into a court enforceable undertaking with CBUS regarding various work that has to be done by them to improve operational risk matters and matters such as controls around expenditure. Also, and that CEU was published I think a week or so ago, also they have produced a remediation plan for the recommendations of the Deloitte report, and that has been accepted by us and announced publicly. Now, also as part of the matters that we were looking into, we took a somewhat unusual step of announcing that we had commenced an investigation. And that's an enforcement investigation under our formal enforcement powers. Because of that, Senator, and because that is current, I'm going to say very little about that, other than its investigation into CBUS's approach to expenditure management following concerns that have been identified in the experts' report. And I think you'll be aware, Senator, and indeed Deloitte's appeared before you recently, of the fact that, I may be paraphrasing Deloitte's words, but they found certainly insufficient evidence of systems and controls and procedures around expenditure management of certain of the sample areas they looked at.
Okay.
So I think the question you're asking is exactly what we're testing in the investigation that we're currently carrying out.
Is the birthday party part of that investigation?
Aspects of expenditure wider than what was simply looked at in the Deloitte's report are subject to that investigation. I look to my legal colleague to the left to confirm whether what I said was accurate.
What do you know about the birthday party?
So the CBUS's approach to expenditure management generally is under investigation currently. I don't think it would be appropriate for us to comment further because of any prejudice to ongoing enforcement activity. So
I imagine more generally then in your role as a regulator you would be proposing to publish something at the end of this investigation which is a deterrent to others?
Well, Senator, I think the whole purpose of enforcement cases, if brought following an investigation that substantiates evidence to bring them, is to send deterrent messages. You're completely right. It's to deter in the specific case and it is to send a wider deterrent message. But the thing I have to say is this is the commencement of an investigation. Obviously, we have to go through the process,
I understand.
gather the evidence, take legal advice, make decisions, and if appropriate, and there is a case to be brought, advance that case. The fact that we have put into the public domain as part of that package of measures with CBUS that we have commenced an investigation is something that we thought we should do in the interests of transparency and the public interest. It won't be in every case that we announce an investigation because actually that's just the commencement of a process. But because we were going to talk publicly about other CBUS matters, we concluded that it was correct and transparent to put that into the public domain. Where we do that, Senator, it's clearly the case that we either arrive at a moment where we bring a case or for whatever reason we decide there's insufficient evidence to bring a case. So what happens in relation to that case will inevitably be a matter in the public domain.
Yeah. Look, I really appreciate the work that you're doing at APRA. I think it's very important, high-profile work because there is so much money at stake here and there is a potential for great malfeasance. But I would say, and this will lead me to a question, that I do think a lot of this work has been developed because of the 9 newspapers' investigations into the CFMEU. That has generated a lot of this work because it pushed it into the public domain in a way which was irresistible. So I guess my question is, are there other funds and are there more systemic approaches to investigating the overall expenditure on inappropriate things like birthday parties and junkets and the like?
Well, we have published a significant amount of expenditure data now pursuant to the transparency push that we've been heralding for a while. And in the context of that, we have given messaging and speeches about how we are going to push into certain areas, how we're essentially going to select from a whole massive amount of data cases that we think deserve or warrant following up because they look unusual or on the face of it, how can this be in the best financial interest of members?
Okay.
I will go back on your starting premise, Senator. APRA has been building an enforcement capability for some time now, a time that predates by a significant time the CFMEU revelations.
Good.
So that capability, part of it is represented in this room now. It was part of a deliberate determination by APRA a couple of years ago that we had to have the capability ourselves to pursue some enforcement cases, even though the primary focus of our business is a prudential regulatory supervision. So you can track back to when we started to make those developments of that team.
Good.
And I am very pleased to say I think we have a highly effective enforcement capability now, although not a huge one.
That's good. Just
Senator,
finally, yes,
because I think it's an important point that Ms Coles ended on. I mean, you will form your own views on the catalyst for action. What I want to make very clear is we have a systematic approach on how we view things. We have a law to administer that is very clear, and we've got a posture that where supervision is not working in the way that we need it to work, we will escalate up the toolkit and we will use all mechanisms at our disposal. And that is regardless of what's printed in the papers or anything else. That's our own view.
I can see that, and that's very much welcome. Look, just finally, I'm conscious of time. I have to say I have been critical of APRA for facilitating the changes to the trust deeds a few years ago. I'm wondering whether, on reflection, you've considered whether that was a good thing to do in light of the best interest duty and in light of the best financial interest test. Because ultimately, the fines that are likely to be accrued by these funds, and at the moment, I think there was one handed down on Friday through the federal court to Australian Super of $27 million, that is now going to be paid by the members. And that is because of the trust deed changes that were facilitated through the state Supreme Courts. So I just wonder, on reflection, I don't expect you to say here at St Esmet, we've completely buggered it up. But have you thought, on reflection, whether that is going to be in the best interest of members, that when big fines are coming in, that the members will pay, not the shareholders.
So, Senator, I think we've thought about this a great deal because it's been a debate in the public eye actually since quite some time. I think since the changes to the legislation were mooted in 2019, certainly since I've joined APRA in July 2021, it was an issue that was being widely discussed. I suppose I'd slightly take issue with changes that APRA facilitated. I would say that APRA, with a great deal of care and with the benefit of advice, took the view that what it should do is intervene with the courts in most of the court applications to explain to the courts the importance of the issue, to explain the context, to explain APRA's mandate, to explain the best financial interest duty, and to make sure that the court was aware of all those issues. The other reason for intervening is that in each of the applications to change a trustee, it wasn't a generic application. What we needed to look at is or invite the court to look at, was what was specifically intended, how specifically that would work through, what specifically was the amount that was to be built, for example, by way of a trustee risk reserve, and how that was to be governed, if you like. And we went into this process intending to assist the court and the process by pulling out all those relevant details. When you look at the issue as it was considered by the courts, they looked at the wording of the legislation. And I know, Senator, you know far more about this, the passing of the legislation than I do. But a court interprets the intent of Parliament through the wording of the statute that is put in front of it. And the wording of the statute was quite specific as to indemnification provisions. And the court, and I think there were 15 applications, and all courts held that what was intended and put forward by way of changes to the trustee to raise fees for the purposes of building a trustee risk reserve did not infringe the wording of the provisions in the statute. Now, that's how the system is supposed to work, I think. Parliament passes legislation, courts interpret it. Our agency, with great care and thought, invited the court to consider a number of relevant matters. Those relevant matters really did go into the best financial interest duty, which had to be weighed against the possibility that a major super fund like Australian Super could be rendered insolvent by a relatively minor administrative fine. Now, that was an issue considered by the courts. The courts weighed the balance of the best financial interest duty with the interests of members. So I feel that APRA did the right thing there. We can choose to disagree. We stand by what our
just quickly, because time is short. I just wanted to check whether or not you actually did ask. Sorry, did you want to say something? Sure. What would you like to say?
If I thought Senator Bragg was remotely motivated by the best interests of superannuation members, I'd be paying attention to that.
Thanks for your political speech.
The idea that his concern about these is motivated by anything but an entirely ideological
point of order?
view.
Yeah.
You're now impugning that. You've got no idea. You're way out of your depth. You are way out of your
ideological view.
You are way out of your depth.
That is all about. That is all about.
Point of order. He's impugning.
Not being able to.
Sorry. Point of order. Point of order.
Minister.
You be quiet. Point of order.
Minister.
Yes.
If you just take a rest, and also Senator Bragg, I just note that uncharacteristic behaviour on your part, but you have
he's impugning my motives.
Yeah, your point of order is that the minister attributed motives to you, and Minister, you might reflect on that as I give you the call.
Thank you. Well, we all have different motives, some of them about the public interest, some of them not, but it's a matter for other people to make a judgment about that, I suppose.
Well, look, I'm conscious of time, and I guess my only other very brief question was whether you considered whether the shareholders could make a contribution to avoid that insolvency.
That really is a policy question for Treasury, in my view.
So we just had a... Did you listen to the answer? She just gave a very detailed answer about the legal mechanics of how the trustee works.
I did, yes, and I heard her answer. I think a long discussion about policy views is not something that the agency is able to...
I don't think that is a policy question. It's a question of operation of the law. So can we just seek some advice on that?
I have something of an answer, whether it will satisfy. So
I think we might give you the call, Ms. Cole, and see what happens. Deputy Chair.
So one of the things that we did invite the courts to go into was whether the trustees who were seeking an amendment to the trustees to raise the fee raising for the risk reserve had exhausted all other possibilities of raising funds to cover such a penalty. The primary one that people looked at, actually, that pops into my mind is insurance. I can't actually remember whether anyone addressed the specific question that Senator Bragg is raising, but I do know that APRA does not consider it within its powers, and this is where the policy point the Minister made came in, to simply decide to impose a shareholder capital requirement on not-for-profit super funds. And I also observed that super funds were required to have capital in the sum of $5 million up till 2012, when that provision was repealed and replaced by APRA's own requirements in our standards to have an operational risk reserve, and now the provisions for a risk reserve to pay penalties. When that risk reserve is created, like it or not, Senator, the law says that that is no longer members' money. So fines you are talking about will not be coming out of members' money. They'll be coming out of money that's on the trustee's own balance sheet.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have a few questions also in the superannuation space. You answered some questions earlier. They're probably for you, Ms. Cole, but I'm in your hands. You answered some questions earlier around the supervisory attention that you're paying in relation to best financial interest duty around travel, entertainment, conferences. I am just interested to know whether you have data or a sense of how the expenditure in those categories compares between the super system and other financial sectors that you regulate.
Oh, I don't think we would have that. I was about to give a colleague a go at speaking tonight, but I don't think we have that, Senator, no.
And is that because you just don't have the data?
We're collecting data very specifically pursuant to requirements, I think, of us, but also our own design of data collections to enhance transparency specifically in super. I don't believe that we have any such data or collections from other industries that we regulate, and it would be kind of a different construct there because, of course, of the best financial interest duty and the member relationship would not apply there. So perhaps it would not be spotlighted. It's certainly not spotlighted in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. So you don't have that
we
data
don't have a
because
benchmark.
You haven't done that supervision in those sectors.
No.
Okay.
We don't require it in the same way, Senator.
Because
we don't
of the
have
member focus in
right.
superannuation.
Yeah. But we're happy. I mean, if it's useful, we're happy to talk about what we do know within super on the expenditure categories that you talked about. So,
and I think you answered this in relation to Senator Bragg's questions, but did you have a supervision focus on this question for some period of time, or was it prompted by more recent events?
Oh, specifically on expenditure.
Yes.
Certainly that was underway. Work had already been done on expenditure preceding my arrival at APRA, which happened to coincide with the change from the best interest duty to the best financial interest duty. So there was already some thematic work and reporting that was coming out around that time. We then put the best financial interest duty lens onto expenditure, and we move forward from there. And alongside that, we enhanced our capability to collect and process and analyse data. So those two things were running along together, but it certainly goes back quite some time.
Yeah. So you've been collecting this data in relation to super funds for the reasons that we just articulated for some time.
Yes, at least back to 21, probably before then.
Sorry?
At least back to 2021 and probably before
2021,
then.
okay.
Well, that's when the duty changed from in the Your Future, Your Super legislation, when the duty changed from best interest duty to best financial interest duty, effective on the 1st of July 21, as I will always remember because that was the day I joined APRA, so that's why I can always remember that. Before then, such data being collected, but not so granular, not so extensive. That programme has built over time, along with the building of APRA's systems for data collection.
So I'm not sure what you publish of that data. I'm sure it's on the public record, and I could know, but I don't know. So do you just publish that data at an aggregate level?
No,
you mentioned it's more granular.
I'll ask my colleague.
Thank you.
To answer that.
Thanks. Senator Carmen Beverley-Smith, Executive Director for Life, Private Health Insurance and Superannuation. Ms Cole is correct. We've been collecting granular superannuation data for a number of years. Up until 2023, that was on a best endeavours basis. As at 2023, our reporting standard 332 came into effect. We now collect fund level, line by line expenditure data on a number of categories, discretionary and non-discretionary spend.
Okay.
And we publish it.
And we do publish that quarterly, Senator. Yep.
Okay. So you've got a sort of an expense ratio that is published at an aggregate and a fund by fund level?
We publish line by line expenditure data for every fund quarterly.
So just to give you a feel, I mean, it's 42,000 lines of data, Senator.
Yeah. So is there a sort of a measure or a benchmark, forgive me, but is there a sort of a measure or a benchmark that you're using to sort of assess, what appears to be a sort of within band ratio of expenses towards travel, entertainment, conferences, as opposed to other expenses?
Not as such, Senator. What we do is we do have an intensified supervision approach as it relates to expenditure data. What we triage the many tens of thousands of lines of data that we get in. We focus on discretionary data, relative and absolute outliers in terms of size and payees. Yeah. And we also focus on any items of expenditure that upon observation it's not apparent that it's in the best financial interests of members. So we do compare data, but we don't use certain set metrics.
Yeah. And so that answer may answer this question. Do you sort of analyse the data by fund type, for example? Like, do you think it's useful to look at how these expenditures look in for-profit funds versus profit-to-member funds, for example? Do you do that sort of analysis?
We actually we look at the actual expenditure line item, Senator, as opposed to the nature of the fund itself.
Yeah.
And if there is something that on the surface doesn't look like it's in the best financial interests of members, we will engage with the fund and get more information on that.
So someone could look at all that careful data that you collect and do that analysis of, are there sort of issues or metrics in relation to these sorts of expenses relative to other expenditures, and does that differ for-profit or profit-to-member funds? People could take that data and do that, but you don't do it yourself.
That's correct.
So you're neutral. You're sort of neutral on that question, is what you would say. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. I just want to go. Just got a couple of minutes. and go to the quarterly super performance statistics from September 24, which I think you'd be able to speak to. Can you speak to those?
Potentially. I'll listen to your question first, Senator.
So I wanted to just go to a question around that. I think, it's well documented that the returns of funds in that period were high, were an average of 13.4%, and I'm talking about investment returns to members. For all funds in the year up to September 2024, as I understand it. I think this is an area where you can see a difference between the performance on that metric in terms of investment returns to members, of profit to member funds versus for-profit funds. I think over a 20-year period, industry funds or profit to member funds made a net investment return of 7.1%. And for retail or for-profit funds, that net return was less than that at around 5.5%. And that difference could potentially be quite significant in terms of someone's savings that they're able to access for their retirement. Does APRA sort of observe that on that question of investment returns, that the profit to member funds or industry funds are typically the best performing? Is that what your data shows, and do you observe that?
So, Senator, providing greater transparency on product performance is critical in delivering good member outcomes across the industry. APRA is committed to delivering that transparency. Primarily, we do that through two publications. One is the performance test, and the other is our comprehensive product performance package, which we published for the first time in October last year. What we do measure, we publish a suite of metrics at the product level. Different funds have different products that they deliver. So what APRA does do is report on performance at the product level rather than the fund level. Right.
So you don't observe that the profit to member or industry funds return a higher investment on average than the for-profit or retail funds?
It's not something specifically that APRA publishes. Again, it will be...
That seems sort of extraordinary that you don't look at that. So APRA does not observe a difference between the investment performance of different types of fund and doesn't sort of consider that to be relevant.
So, Senator, when we engage with funds, we engage with them on the performance of every single one of their products, as opposed to looking at the fund in its entirety. APRA's expectations is that each of the products deliver performance returns a bunch above benchmarks that are set in the performance test.
So, I mean,
I think we're going to let these people go about 10 minutes ago.
There does appear to be a sort of a model of governance, perhaps in profit to member funds, which would seem to be correlated with higher returns. That doesn't seem to be a problematic finding.
I don't think we could draw that conclusion,
right.
Senator, from
you don't draw that conclusion.
Anything that we
So you do accept, I think, that there's higher investment returns to members on those funds that have a certain structure, the profit to member structure. You observe that,
but you
don't attribute it to the sort of the model of
no, we don't draw any
the fund
conclusions
governance
at a fund level. The ATO publishes material, but I'm just struggling to remember what that is, actually.
As I understand it, the ATO, I think, publishes product-level performance data as well, Senator.
Senator Rennick.
Going. Does APRA have enforcement powers over the banks at all? Are you not able to enforce any action?
Yes.
I guess the reason why I ask is that we've completed an ARAT Senate inquiry last year that looked into the closure of branches in the regions because banks have closed thousands of branches in the last 20 years, and they've now given this soft commitment not to shut any more branches until 2027. There was originally a banking code of conduct that said banks couldn't leave town unless they had done a proper consultation with the community, and if they were the last bank in town, they couldn't leave. Now, that was completely trashed. They've closed branches without following... Andrew, keep it down, please. And they've completely disregarded the banking code of conduct, and basically out of ARAT, we've got nothing out of this Senate inquiry. We've got nothing whereby the banks have been, made or held accountable for shutting down branches. So is that something APRA is going to take more seriously? Because this is becoming a real issue.
So, Senator, thanks for your question. It's a matter of great public interest, we know that. So our enforcement powers are centred around areas where there is a legislative obligation to do something that's not met and supervision is not working the way that we want, or against prudential standards. So the code, I think, that you're talking about is an industry code. That's correct,
yeah, it's an old banking code of conduct.
Yeah, so I think the short answer is that is not something that we would look at and apply enforcement powers in that particular instance.
Right, so what mechanisms are there to stop banks from closing branches? Full stop. I don't care whether it's in the regions or in the cities. I mean, I think the post office has a commitment to keep 4,000 branches open across the country.
Yes.
Is there a similar type of commitment to make banks do the same, given that they have a massive social licence in the sense they got a $188 billion term funding facility in COVID at extremely cheap rates? They bailed out in the GFC. You couldn't short them, even though they could short everyone else. We know that they're too big to fail, so they have an inherent government guarantee.
Yes.
How do we hold these people to account?
I understand, Senator, and I'll ask Ms McCarthy-Hockey to talk about one of the publications that we do and what's in that publication that I think goes to your question. Fundamentally, I think it's a set of policy issues. It's
Right.
it's not an issue for APRA. But having said that, we do have an interest in it, and as well as being a prudential regulator, we're also a data collection agency as well. And so one of our data collections does actually look at points of presence, and we collect that to try to provide more transparency for policymakers to make judgments on. But Therese, is there anything you want to add?
Yes, thank you. And we do collect that data, and we do provide that to Treasury and other parts of government interested in that. It is clear that the trend is down. That is true, and the context is that customers are using cash less in general, and that's why some of that has happened. But we are seeing across 6 years, of sort of 7 years that we've been producing it, a 44% reduction in major cities, 36% in regions, so a little bit less in the regions. And that's similar to this year as well. We'll be doing another collection coming into the June data and publishing that in October. We make every effort to make sure it's got some value for those who are reading it, and we know that people do look at the data, so we've made some effort around geographic data to make that easier to engage with. That we have it's sort of slice and dice capability. We've drawn out some much more of that perspective on how much of it's Australia Post.
Thanks.
So
I'm aware of the
trying to
information. It's what are we going to do about it, though? Do you know what I mean? Like you can have a set of management accounts, but if you don't act on them and stop this from happening.
That's right. That is beyond the powers of APRA. We do not have the powers. What we do is we do look after all our depositors' monies, regardless of the bank. So the Banking Act is for every banking model that exists. So it can be sort of what you'd call the big banks with lots of branches. You can be small mutuals. Completely digital banks are also governed by the one code. So we have no powers, and the Act does not relate to the way in which banks will relate to their customers. It is a matter for the banks.
Okay.
I can hear that you have that real concern for the community, and we know, because we collect this data, we did hear from the community. They want better data. We've done as much as we can. We want to try and keep feeding that back, but our powers are limited because we relate to every bank in the system.
Okay, thank you. So in regards to deposits, do you only have powers in regards to deposit taking? What about loans? Like, what's your relationship with AFCA?
Can I just, before you get to that question, Senator Rennick, on the rural bank question, I think the way that APRA have described their role in that is absolutely right. The announcement that the Treasurer made a few weeks ago, and I mean, I share your view. You can't grow up in a country town and not understand how important banking services are, not just for people who don't necessarily use digital services, but for businesses, but also just for the shopfront in country towns. Like actually having a livable space in the main street of country towns matters. It matters in terms of the availability of cash. Like actually matters for those purposes as well. And 36% of rural bank branches closed over the course of the last decade. The approach that the government's taken is set out in that agreement with firstly with the larger banks. The enforcement mechanism, which I think was what you were trying to come to in your question, beyond agreement and a position in writing set out to the Treasurer, there are signed deeds that underpin that. So there is an enforcement mechanism there. That takes us through to 2027. Right. The government will be watching this set of developments very carefully. Like the last thing you need is an alternative government not committed to these issues and then everything falling off a cliff in 2027. So we'll be watching these developments very closely. It is an important holding position that delivers that outcome. Sure. Then there are these other outcomes that are with Australia Post. And I think from memory, Suncorp and ANZ, HS, but there's a series of arrangements there that have been reached. So it's not just those big deposit-taking banks, because you want to incorporate more sort of competition into the model. And thirdly, the government's reforms in terms of, the things that we have done, including the arrangements with Armaguard and others that were reached earlier on in terms of ensuring that rural banks have got access to cash. For all of the reasons that I think you and I share, it is a very important set of questions, but I think it's not a set and forget thing where this arrangement is reached and then it just keeps getting rolled over. This delivery of services, whether it's banking, whether it's rural air services, whether it's a range of these sort of commitments, we've got to keep these country towns alive.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Minister. Can I just go to the other question?
Senator Rennick.
So just in regards, what's your relationship with AFCA in terms of, I'm getting swamped now with people, sort of, once you get on these rabbit holes, you get referral bias. So now I'm getting swamped with people who have issues with AFCA and they feel as though their issues aren't being addressed properly by AFCA. But AFCA, and I suspect this is correct as well, don't actually have much enforcement powers over the banks either when these people have issues with their home loans or their lending. What's the mechanism? What mechanism do you have, and you may not have any, and AFCA has in regards to enforcing loan agreements and contractual agreements between banks and customers?
Well, that's very much at the consumer end, Senator. So broadly, the way to think about it is we're at the front end, so we're at the safety end. So we're operating through regulated entities to make sure that the system remains safe and some of those issues do not happen. And as it goes down the chain and there is an issue with the consumer, one of the last resorts is AFCA. They're a separate body. It's not, we have an interest in what they do, but our enforcement powers don't extend to what they do.
Yeah, right. So you're pretty much mutually exclusive.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Cheers. Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Senator O'Neill.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate your last response there, Mr. Lonsdale, about the front end and the back end. It depends on where you're sitting, what you might perceive, but I think for millions of Australians, they see AFCA as a critical part of that whole system.
Of course.
And integrated with you. I just wanted to ask a general question about the product design and implementation, particularly matters now that are being aired, led by Flequity's leader, Catherine Fitzpatrick, around products in the banking sector that are inspired by the concept of safety by design. Does APRA have a view about that?
I think, Senator, they're best addressed by ASIC. So we do not design products. We don't have regulations that guide the banks on what they sell. So they are commercial decisions for the banks. ASIC, though, if I understand your question, do have product design obligations and DDO obligations.
They do.
So they are a separate agency, and I think you're seeing them tomorrow.
I just go to your opening statement, the second paragraph, with some considerably reassuring news. APRA is pleased to confirm to you and the Australian community that our financial system remains resilient and stable, supported by a well-developed regulatory framework and preemptive management of risks by APRA and its regulated entities. Could I put it to you, Mr. Lonsdale, that while ASIC has particular responsibilities, you are the ones who are interacting with the banks. There are risks to them that are not just about money, but also about financial impacts of decisions that they make, about what they invest in their back office, what they report to you in CPS 230.
Yes.
All of these things, in my view, are integrated, and I struggle somewhat with this separation. We look after the money side of it because the money is not an artefact in itself. It's connected to all these products and the impacts that they have right across the sector.
Yes, Senator.
Which goes to, the point that you were making about it being a risk-managed situation. So can I ask you, perhaps there's somebody there who can make a comment about the integration of fiduciary management and money management alongside product offerings and interactions in the marketplace?
So, Senator O'Neill, we did have Catherine Fitzpatrick come to our executive team and board to actually talk about the work that she's doing. I think it is really important work, and she raises such fundamental issues of harm that can emanate from decisions that are made, or just not being aware of the impact of the decisions that are being made, if they're very much just at a product and a process level as opposed to thinking about the consequence. So thinking about the consequence of missharing information by not understanding what it might mean to actually disclose and address to a victim survivor of financial harm. So I think Catherine's work is incredibly important, and it's one that we listen to, and we listen to her stories, and I think you can't help feel that there is a social responsibility for us to do more to protect victims of that. So I think the awareness is one thing. I think APRA has a unique position in the industry where we can have conversations with boards and executives, which we do, to ask questions around how are you thinking about these issues to raise awareness. So I think they are highly relevant, they're really important, and we're trying to we try and use that our voice of influence in the supervision process to raise awareness of the matters that you're talking about.
Okay, that's really heartening. I'm very glad to hear that.
Therese McCarthy-Hockey. I'll just add just the specifics of how we do that now, and how the work between APRA and ASIC as the twin peaks regulators works. And you will have seen it actually come to life in the hardship piece very much. So ASIC does some very important work, which is the outcome-based at a consumer level, which is what Mr Lonzo already referred to. And what we do, we look a lot at the systems and processes and risk management that is in place. So you see us repeatedly undertaking work across all industries, banking, insurance and superannuation, that the systems and processes, the way in which the governance works is working, and that's where we do sort of, I would say, complementary work between APRA and ASIC. So I think you're very right to say, how do you sort of unpack this, what you would call the connection, the connective tissue between the two agencies. We have very good relations between the two. We are talking quite actively as to how the boundary between our important work that both ASIC does and we do. But I think this is all about, for us, it is our risk management standards and the practices and governance that sets up a successful organisation which delivers good outcomes. ASIC then looks at what are those outcomes achieved. And that's where that really lives in a complementary perspective.
I understand, because I've spent many years overseeing ASIC with the PJC committee, so I do understand in quite some detail their role. But this whole financial service intersection, it's an ecosystem where everything is touching on one another, and the separation doesn't seem to help consumers, in my experience. You indicated in your opening statement an increase in the capital add-on applied to ANZ of $750 million due to heightened concerns about the bank's non-financial risk management practices. That was quite a significant move. And, having seen some CPS 230 documents in previous years, not anything related to the current situation in ANZ, the risk, non-financial risk, comes in a range of forms, and not only with the digital investment in back-of-house technologies, but also in the design of product, I would put to you, that it's absolutely not that far. So could you speak to the current situation with regard to the ANZ and the $750 million due to those heightened concerns about non-financial risk?
Well, I can speak for some of it, Senator, but it's an issue still underway. So
I don't want to compromise anything.
No, but I can give you a thumbnail sketch of where we are. So that institution had some particular non-financial risk issues. There were a set of issues within the markets business of that entity. We applied an additional $250 million, taking the total to $750 million capital overlay. We required a report to be undertaken, and that report is being undertaken. It's not completed yet. Once we see that report, then we will make some decisions on what to do next. But I think the important point out of this, which is where I think you are going, is that non-financial risk is a very, very important risk category that needs to be addressed. And we've got a number of, I think we've got a strong track record now of leaning into that, whether it's on governance, whether it's on accountability. Issues that go to remuneration come up from time to time, as well as culture.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I just wanted to reflect, and perhaps this is a question on notice to you, Ms Cole or Ms Beverley-Smith. You talked about the reporting standard 332 and your line-by-line data collection. I'm sure there are AI tools that you're using now to interrogate that data in interesting ways. You indicated you use relative and absolute outliers to pick up information, but you also said that the action that you take does not rely on set metrics. And my question then, from a systems point of view, is how do the people that you are judging assess themselves or adopt practices themselves if you don't articulate set metrics for them to observe?
Well, they have to observe the requirement to act in the best financial interests of their members, and
do you have metrics around that?
No, well, our provisions require them to have systems and procedures. We can elaborate.
So my
more
concern
on that.
is how arbitrary could this selection of relative and absolute outliers be, and how unknowable is the measuring stick of APRA in that regard?
The way it works, and I'll ask my colleague to come in, is it enables us to pick up and require them to explain to us why that payment or expenditure is in the best financial interest of their members, in the sense it exposes information to us that enables us to follow up on whether there is adequate systems and adequate performance of the duty. So that is what it is there to do.
I might have some more questions on notice about that, because I'm not quite sure how the transparency around that would operate in effect to drive and improve change and make things clear to people who could inadvertently be unaware of a metric that you are now operating, which you haven't articulated.
I think we're on a journey with it, Senator, to be honest. I think we would say that we are on a journey of promoting transparency and working through the data and using it to put trustees to the test as to how they are operationalising their requirement to act in the best financial interests of members.
Yeah, and I guess then what is the preventative piece and how do you articulate that? I guess that's what my thinking is. With regard to the statement of expectations in 2023 and the update, you've applied an expectation when requesting information from entities about these new standards. How's APRA implementing the government's expectation that proportionate regulatory requirements be applied to smaller regulated entities?
You're talking right across our regulated entity population, Senator.
Yeah, so I'm particularly interested in the small, not just consumer, but like smaller entities, that the ones often covered by COBA, for example.
Yes. So, might ask Ms. Therese McCarthy-Hockey to help me, but I think I'll start by saying everything we do in APRA, whether we're formulating policy, whether we're supervising or whether we're collecting data, has a proportionate element to it. So if you look at policy, for example, and the key prudential metrics on capital, there's a difference. So if you're a major bank, you're at 18.5 CET1. If you're a regional, you're much less. We've got a risk weighting system, very complex, risk-based for major banks, standardised system, much simpler for a lot of other banks. On liquidity, we've got an LCR system for major banks. We've got an MLH, much simpler system for smaller banks and credit unions. If you look at credit requirements, we have a whole range of issues that do not apply, that they're exempt at the credit union end. So, for example, interest rate risk in the banking book would be an example of that. If you look at resolution and recovery planning, a major bank compared to a small credit union, very different. Every major policy change that APRA has implemented in the past 5 years that I can remember has proportionality built into it.
Maybe using two of those examples,
sure,
the areas that you've mentioned in terms of change and differentiation between the two quite different contexts. Can you give me an example of where the regulatory burden, which is often called, red tapes, etc., where the regulatory burden has been reduced?
Sorry, where it has been reduced?
Yeah.
So I'll give you several examples. So I ran through a range of issues there that we kind of forget about, but they are part of the architecture, right, that we regulate on. So I would highlight...
Sorry, Chair, I can't quite hear the witnesses.
Highlight all those...
I will bring myself to order. Sorry, Mr. Lonsdale. You have the call. Mr. Lonsdale.
So I'd highlight all those areas. Last year we announced, I think there might have been 8 or 9 reporting standards on the banking side that we removed. And reporting is a big burden if you're little. If you're big, it's less of an issue. If you're little, it is a significant issue.
Yep.
We currently have underway a review of our SFI, non-SFI thresholds. We've talked about that, as well as licensing arrangements and looking at, if you're little, what sort of licensing arrangements might apply to you, which may well be different if you want to come in as a full licence. But, Senator, if I could just pause and ask Ms McCarthy-Hockey to fill in the blanks.
Okay, so I also have a point of order, Chair. Just on timing, I think there was an informal agreement to try and get through the last few witnesses tonight, and I know that the Labor government doesn't want to have certain Treasury officials and Housing Australia come and give evidence tonight, but I do think it would be...
That's impugning the investigation that we're asking you to...
I do think it would be appropriate that we try and get to the witnesses as agreed, rather than continuing with this filibuster.
Honestly,
for the record,
on this question, I don't think Senator Bragg means to. I really don't think he does. But we have had coalition senators interrupting women speakers at these things all day. And it ought to stop. It ought to stop. It ought to stop. Well, just let Senator O'Neill ask her questions. Let Ms McCarthy-Hockey answer them.
Anything for the filibuster.
And you know, you may not think these questions are important, but there's a constituency that Senator O'Neill that Senator O'Neill talks to. Not sure how many people are watching Senator McDonald.
I'm sure that the customer and banking...
I think what they would want to hear is senators asking questions and officials answering them. And less of the sort of inside baseball Canberra points of order and more of the asking questions and answering them.
Thank you.
And I would just add to that from my perspective, Senator Bragg, that this committee has long-standing issues with managing time. Opposition senators today have had more time than government senators, as always. And so your suggestions are incorrect, and you've put private discussions on the record. I did try to assist you earlier in the day when time was blowing out to draw that to your attention, to seek your assistance to manage the people on your team. And yet here we are in the same situation that we are always in this group of Senate estimates, having time problems that we have always had, not because of government questions, but because of the time management issues on the opposition side. Senator O'Neill was about to get towards the end of a 15-minute block, and because of this intervention, she is still in that 15-minute block. Senator O'Neill, so senators have questions, as you always say to me, senators have questions. So Senator O'Neill, your question.
Thank you. So Ms McCarthy-Hockey was about to answer my question about the reduction in regulatory burden for smaller entities in particular.
Thank you. So I might just add to Mr Lonsdale's perspectives that he's put. He's given you quite a lot of policy perspectives. I might give you a little bit on how we manage data and supervision. So for larger organisations, we have data submissions happening across the year in quite a high lot of intensity, and we have 21 returns on a quarterly basis. For small organisations, that is 3 forms once a year. So that's the first thing, just to really try and make sure that we recognise that compliance teams, reporting teams, there's smaller capacity, how to manage that. And then what we do is we take that data and we use it in a kind of data-enabled way. So we're really mindful of trying to look across the portfolio, looking for outliers and to reduce the burden. And that's when the supervision comes in. So when you look to supervision across our small entities, and I should have probably said earlier, we categorise into 4 categories. Okay. There are 80 Tier 4s. So the Tier 4 category, they might see us on a every 2 or 3 year perspective because we rely on the data and we do a lot of benchmarking. But when you look to the bigger organisations and Tier 1 in particular, that will be more than 10 rather extensive reviews across different risk categories, board engagement, senior leader engagement, every year.
Reporting.
So we're really trying to differentiate, yes, the policies do one thing, but the lived experience of how often we're engaging and what we're requiring. That said, there's always more we can do, and we are looking at things like our thresholds, the categorisations, the data. Is it meaningful? Is it what we want? Only just this last couple of weeks, we've reduced a requirement around a cloud information paper. We also removed another data collection. So we're always
and these
trying
are all
to
calculated to make sure there's no risk embedded in it, but that it gives you sufficient supervision. It's just a clean house situation.
That's right. We need the confidence. We need to sit here and say, yep, we're confident. We know where the banks are at in every part of the system. But actually then how do we glean that? And we use different techniques like smarter data.
Yeah. So
sorry, just on that question, I think it's also true that that part of the benefit of this is that it benefits those smaller banks disproportionately, extending this kind of support. I thought Senator Rennick was still there, but the question that he was asking about those sort of smaller banks in trying to get into regional areas and into country towns, this kind of work makes a difference for them. Obviously engages with their larger institutions as well, but it's something that makes a difference in the country as well.
Yeah, I saw it in Gulgong the other day outside the Commonwealth Bank there, and talking to locals about how they're managing out that way.
I think Ms Cole also has a comment on the FAR proportionality.
Thank you.
Hopefully another wrong answer. Never from me.
I've got more questions.
Okay.
I think if Senator Bragg was to
drag this out. You don't want Housing Australia.
I think if Senator Bragg was to reflect on that injection.
My next question is about housing.
I understand people get edgy late at night, but
I don't usually actually. But you're trying to obfuscate the process.
Yes, Senator Bragg, I don't think snide interjections towards officials are really that helpful. And I think if you reflected on what you just said and the tone, you would probably think you shouldn't.
You're all dragging your answers out to avoid.
Shouldn't do it.
Future witnesses.
Shouldn't do it.
I've got questions.
I can give a short answer.
Well, don't feel bullied by Senator Bragg. Give her a proper answer.
Miss Cole. And then I've got a question about
it was
housing.
try to be helpful with an example that we had, driving proportionality that came from a suggestion by APRA itself, and you'll know the financial accountability regime has taken a while in its passage through Parliament, and then putting the various rules in place. One of the things there was that the entities for banking and then for insurance and super who come under it in the next few weeks have to produce quite a lot of information to APRA by certain deadlines, including maps, roles and responsibilities, detailed information of that nature. And it seemed to us about this time last year, as we were sort of looking through this, and the Minister was in the process of considering the Minister rules he had to make, that perhaps the categorisation of entities could change to relieve the burden on a greater number of them, because there was a categorisation, I might get the wording wrong, of enhanced and standard entities based on size. But enhanced was a size that really wasn't all that big for some of them. And therefore we went forward and suggested via Treasury, who took it to the Minister, that we should change the levels of categorisation, which meant that smaller entities had far less of the administrative burden of this. They're still caught by the regime, but the sort of advanced mapping and the scale of the roles and responsibilities was less.
So these are significant changes to efficiency and productivity?
I would say so, and it was a direct APRA suggestion.
And cuts to cost. Just if I could, final line of questioning here that goes to matters of housing. What changes have you made to clarify arrangements around financing of new unit blocks?
Sorry, apologies, Senator O'Neill, apologies, Ms Cole, the Deputy Chair.
I've just been ignoring all the noise because it was a lot that I could.
The Deputy Chair has a point of order.
Is that we have significant issues to put on the record with the Treasury in relation to the costing of opposition policies and also about the covenants of the Labor government's housing program with Housing Australia. And I just want to put on record that I think this has been orchestrated to avoid scrutiny. You're trying to avoid scrutiny.
There is no point of order.
This has been dragging out for no reason.
There is no point of order, and the Minister can respond, or I'll go to Senator O'Neill.
Yeah. Well, you go for
how many houses is $10 billion fund bill?
$10 billion for
300 or zero. You want to duck?
Tax deductible.
We'll
lunches.
ask the agency if we get a chance. You want to duck?
Tax deductible lunches. The one idea that's in this show.
You know,
this is always very edifying. This hour of the committee for our witnesses in the regulators and the agencies.
One more question.
I think Senator O'Neill. I think Senator O'Neill is struggling to get through her questions with all of the interjections, and she has the call. Senator O'Neill.
So, ironically, given the commentary that's prevailing here, my question goes to a matter around housing and housing access that APRA is intimately engaged with, and it's just another part of the strategy of this government to attend to the reality that neglecting the housing sector over decades doesn't actually assist Australians who need housing. So my understanding is that you have made changes with regard to arrangements around the financing of new unit blocks. And my question is, what exactly have you done? What is the rationale for that? And what is the anticipated impact, or if you can already explain what's already happening?
So I'll ask
Mr. Lonsdale.
Ms McCarthy-Hockey can
Thank
tell
you,
you what to do.
Ms McCarthy-Hockey.
Yes. So we have standards which go to how banks would think about the collateral and the arrangements for what's called pre-sales of unit blocks or other multi-dwelling residences. And our standards say that the banks need to prudently think about that. Now, we had written to banks when there was sort of an exuberant period of investor sort of lending at that time, and we asked them to consider how they thought about that and was it prudent. Some banks had interpreted that as more conservative, so we've been working with banks to sort of make sure they understand that our intent is not to take away their own credit assessment, and there is no requirement for 100% pre-sale, which was sort of the concern. And we've written to banks and in a public way announced that we have just made that clarification such that banks can make their assessment on those dwellings.
Okay. So if I understood what you said, there's the historical period going back to, 16 or 17
yes.
was we think you're lending too much money and there's too much risk, you need to be careful. That has been interpreted as we have to sell 100% off the plan before we will finance. That is a break on the building of housing and development. So you have now clarified in 2024 or 2025?
We just have announced it, or just clarified it recently.
What
I could say
was
is we've publicly disclosed, put that position, but we've actually been talking to banks for a long time.
Okay, so they've been getting the message, but you've publicly put it on what date?
Yeah.
This month, so 2025?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
So from 2017 to 2025, developers and lenders have been encountering banks saying that they're using APRA guidance to prevent the financing of the development of units. That stops as of your announcement, and now it's prudential judgment by the banks and not a requirement to sell 100%. So what's the standard? What are the banks doing?
That has always been the case, that it is the bank's decision to look at the profile of the risk.
Sorry to interrupt you, but the Deputy Chair has a point of order.
Given the APRA was due to be dismissed about an hour ago and we still haven't got to Revenue and Housing Australia, can I propose that we extend the time of this hearing to enable us to get to them? So I propose that we extend the time to 11 p.m.
We have a hard marker of 10 p.m. and I've indicated that we have that hard marker throughout the day in comments, and that we've taken modified breaks in order to meet the hard marker of 10 p.m. It's probably a matter for a private sort of discussion, but that will take some time to do, Senator Bragg.
I'm just wondering how much longer Senator O'Neill will be going for.
I'll just get an indication of how long.
My last question. I was just waiting for the final response.
That was her last question, Senator Bragg. So we'll be moving to the revenue group shortly.
That is not true, and you are now beginning to badger, and it's unlike you, Senator, but it's hit a point where I'm pretty sick of having my questions interrupted and being spoken over, which were for hours through the course of this day. It's enough. Enough.
Senator O'Neill.
I think you're the master of it.
Senator Bragg.
You just don't know where to stop. So my last question was asking you about why this interaction had happened and this misunderstanding. Why did it take between 2017 to this month, 2025, for this clarification? Because clearly we need that private investment in housing to get to the goals that we seek for our fellow Australians.
Absolutely.
Why did it take so long?
So it actually has been our standard the whole time that it would be the banks, just their own credit processes. And it actually just came to light around the housing inquiry that came forward that there were banks that were not sure, and there were some reports that borrowers were not sure either. And this was really about us making sure that our standards, as they are, do not require that. It depends on the bank's own credit assessment, and that's what we've clarified.
So we are always on the lookout for ways that we can improve clarity, improve our standards. And up until very recently, it was certainly not clear to us that there was any issue, because the 100% pre-sale issue was not guidance, it's not a standard, it was something that was written in a thematic review that highlighted something that an entity was doing, and it had been interpreted in a particular way. So when it came to light, actually that was what was happening. We've moved very, very quickly to clarify that.
Okay, shame it took from 2017 to 2025 for that to become apparent to everybody. Yeah. I guess that's the ecosystem thing, and people need to be talking to each other more about things in the interest of the consumers. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator.
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Thank you, Mr Lonsdale and the APRA team for answering our questions. That concludes them, and you go with our thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
The committee now welcomes representatives from the Treasury Revenue Group, the Australian Taxation Office, the Tax Practitioners Board and the ACN and the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission. And we'll take a brief suspension while they come to the table. The committee resumes and we welcome representatives of Treasury Revenue Group, the Australian Taxation Office, Tax Practitioners Board and the ACNC. I think you can read that we're quite late in the piece, and if people had opening statements, we'd probably appreciate them just being tabled. Was there any opening statement to be tabled?
Chair, I do have an opening statement. Have been waiting 2.5 hours. It's about 1:30.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. It's once again a privilege to be before this committee with my executive team, many of whom have travelled from around the country, where they represent around 20,000 ATO staff in 22 ATO offices across Australia's metropolitan and regional areas. I've been in the Commissioner role for almost 1 year, and leading the ATO is the privilege I anticipated it to be. I cannot overstate the dedication and integrity of ATO staff. I've had the pleasure of hearing directly from many of them about the dedication to their roles as public servants and tax officers, who are tasked with the important job of assisting their communities to meet their tax obligations, enabling the revenue to be collected so governments can provide the services the community requires. We at the ATO also understand well our responsibility to the Australian community to administer the tax system according to the law and treat access to taxpayer information with the respect and care that is expected by government and the community. Through the year, I've sought to emphasise that the ATO's core role is to collect the right amount of tax in accordance with the law in the most efficient, transparent, empathetic and timely way for the government and the taxpayer. With this as our main focus, I'm pleased to update the committee on our progress. While all tax owed to the government is a priority from individuals and from small and large business, we are moving harder and faster to collect priority debt such as unpaid superannuation guarantee, PAYGW, that is tax that is withheld from employees' pay but not passed on to the government, and GST that is collected from customers but not passed on to the government. And from the small group of taxpayers who exhibit the most non-compliant behaviour in avoiding their obligations. It is important to note that only 22,000 taxpayers are responsible for $11 billion of the total tax debt value. In context, that's about 1% of the total debtors, responsible for well over 20% of the collectible debt owed. To be clear, I'm not talking about just the largest taxpayers. This 1% of taxpayers of varying sizes, and it's this group where our focus lies. The approach we're taking to collect the tax owed to the government is deliberate and targeted, with action being taken for those who repeatedly refuse to engage with us and continue to ignore our reminders. For these taxpayers, we're moving more urgently to deploy the full powers available to us, including issuing director penalty notices, taking garnishee action, and if necessary, taking wind-up action. We're beginning to see the effects of this work through reduction in the amount of debt owed to the government. Collecting what's owed is our job. Importantly, we're also making it fairer by protecting good businesses from those in the system who don't meet their obligations. That is, we're doing our best to assist in ensuring a level playing field. While we have a job to do, it's important that we carefully differentiate those taxpayers who may be experiencing vulnerability from those who are deliberately non-compliant. To support this, the ATO is implementing a vulnerability capability that will strengthen and coordinate the way that ATO supports those who need it most. This program of work will include the development of a framework together with specific actions and activities to support people experiencing vulnerability, including financial abuse. I want to reiterate to the committee a message I provided in the last opening statement. To any taxpayers who may be experiencing financial hardship, the ATO can and will work with you to find a way forward. So please contact us. With that, thank you. Look forward to assisting the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr Hefferon, and thank you also, Ms Woodward, for your opening statement as well. As per usual, are you happy for us to just table that? Thank you,
Senator.
And the committee tables both of those opening statements, and we'll proceed to questions, and we'll go to Senator Smith.
Thank you very much, Chair. Earlier today, the Secretary of the Treasury, Dr Kennedy, said that officials would be available from the Revenue Group to answer questions in regards to the tax deductibility cost of meals. Ms Brown, you are here. Is Mr Darren Kennedy here?
Yes, he is.
Can he come to the table, please? Is Mr Richard Marr here?
Yes, the whole of the Revenue Group SCS are here, Senator.
Can he please come to the table also?
We haven't got enough seats at the table, Senator.
Perhaps someone might like to vacate their seat.
Thank you.
We gladly, who knows?
And excuse my...
Do you want me to go?
That would
Don't
make
be
the committee...
tempted. Don't do it. Don't do it.
In all
You'll
seriousness.
feel bad afterwards.
In all seriousness. And excuse my pronunciation, but I was wondering if Ye Yang Kei is also here.
It's Dr. Ye Young Chai.
Great, thank you.
He is here too, Senator.
Could he please come to the table also? Ms Brown, on the 4th of February 2025, in an interview with Sally Sara on Radio National Breakfast, the Treasurer said, and I quote, "We ask Treasury to cost the announced policy from the coalition," end quote. Ms Brown, is the Treasurer's statement an accurate reflection of the work you undertook?
Senator, I think a similar question to that was asked to the Treasury Secretary this morning. He indicated he won't be commenting on Treasurer's comments, and neither will I, but I will confirm that we costed the policy as per the policy parameters in the email we received on the 29th of January. It wasn't a costing of opposition policy.
On what basis do you think you are entitled to not provide a response or a comment to my question, which specifically asked you whether the Treasurer's statement about the work of Treasury officials was accurate? What's your basis for that?
I think, in fact, I did say that we weren't costing an opposition policy. We were costing policy parameters provided by the office, as in the email of the 29th of January.
Mr Kennedy, again on the 4th of February 2025, in response to questioning from Sally Sara on Radio National Breakfast, the Treasurer said, and I quote, "We asked Treasury to cost the announced policy from the coalition," end quote. Is the Treasurer's statement an accurate reflection of the work you undertook?
Senator, I just can repeat the comments made by Ms Brown that we costed the policy we were expressly asked to cost as per the email of the Wednesday, the 29th of January.
Thank you. Mr Richard Marr, again on the 4th of February 2025, in response to questioning from Sally Sara on Radio National Breakfast, the Treasurer said, and I quote, "We asked Treasury to cost the announced policy from the coalition," end quote. Is the Treasurer's statement an accurate reflection of the work you undertook?
Sorry, Richard Marr, Assistant Secretary, Personal and Indirect Tax and Charities Division. Just echo the comments made by Ms Brown and Mr Kennedy.
So your response is the same as Mr Kennedy's?
Yes, except perhaps just the nuance that I myself was not involved in doing the costing itself, so can't speak to it in quite the same way.
And then finally, Doctor, excuse me, I don't want to get your pronunciation incorrect, but again on the 4th of February 2025, in response to questioning from Sally Sara on Radio National Breakfast, the Treasurer said, I quote, "We asked Treasury to cost the announced policy from the coalition," end quote. Is the Treasurer's statement an accurate reflection of the work you undertook?
Yong Chai, Assistant Secretary from the Tax Analysis Division. Yeah, and I just want to repeat what my colleagues have already said. I did the costing, and that was based on the parameters provided by the office as laid out in the email that we received on the 29th of January.
Great, thank you very much. Given the time, I might pass over to other coalition senators. I do have some other questions of the ACNC and other officials on other matters.
Senator Bragg.
Very quick. Look, just in relation to the tax issues around Dalma, the formwork company, who knows about that?
So, Senator.
That's you?
I would, but obviously, Senator, before you ask any questions, I'd just reiterate that we don't talk about individual taxpayers, particularly in the context where discussing their matters might indeed prejudice those matters.
Okay. I have another matter I would like to ask you about, but I'm not sure I should raise it in this open forum. So I'm wondering whether there might be an opportunity for me to seek some information about some cases to do with phoenixing and the pursuance of people who may have been wrongly associated with someone who has been a serial phoenixer.
Is this construction industry stuff, Senator?
Yes. So is there a good means for me to do that rather than naming names here on the record?
Yeah. Senator, if I could,
improperly?
if there were particular things you wanted to discuss and by way of a briefing about how the process works, what's involved, I think rather than doing it here, we'd be very happy if your office got in contact with mine. We can make sure the relevant people would be available to talk you through what we can do, bearing in mind the restrictions Mr Hirschhorn says around sharing taxpayer information.
Thank you. I'll take you up on that.
So I don't know what you guys... Have you guys...
Sorry, just for the assistants, Mr Kennedy, Dr Chai and Mr Ma are no longer necessary at the table. Yep. But perhaps the ACNC could come back. Yep. Yep.
We won't get
We've got revenue questions. I don't know what just happened with the call. Was it? Did you just reorganise it so it sent it to me?
I've still got questions, but you know this is kind of crazy to be given 10 minutes at the end of the day when we haven't got through all the agencies.
I'm happy to give the call to the opposition. I'm just not sure where to put it.
I've got a question for Ms Brown. Ms Brown, a question I've asked in previous estimates. Are fundraising laws in Australia harmonised?
Senator, that's an issue probably more directed towards Markets Group.
I think you said that last time as well.
I did. But I believe the answer is they're still not harmonised.
They're still not harmonised, thank you. Yep. Ms Woodward, in previous estimates and in correspondence, the ACNC has provided to me information regarding investigations concerning charities with links to terrorist organisations or activities associated with the financing of terrorist activities. Do you have an update to that information that has previously been provided to me?
Sue Woodward, Commissioner, Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission. Senator, I do have an update that from the 7th of October to the 31st of December 2024, the total number of concerns that we've received that relate to the Gaza-Israel conflict total 440.
440. That is interesting because from the 7th of October 2023 to the 19th of September 2024, I think there had been just 145.
There has been an increase, yes, Senator.
And how many of those matters, or how many investigations are underway?
They relate to...
that is 405 complaints, isn't it?
Sorry, 440 complaints.
440 complaints.
And about 8 of those are related to possibly anti-Semitic behaviour. There has been one particular charity where there's been a high number of those complaints, so even though the number's gone up, a very large number of those relate to one particular organisation. And, sorry, what was the further question?
So how many investigations are underway? Sorry, how many investigations have been initiated?
Those complaints relate to 34 charities, and 24 of those specifically raise concerns about terrorist organisations or an association with terrorism financing. We have done 8 investigations. In particular, 2 are ongoing, 6 have been finalised, and 1 has been referred to another government agency.
In previous evidence for the period the 7th of October 23 to the 19th of September 24, you said to me that there had been 8 investigations also.
Correct.
So is that to say that even though there have been an increase from 145 complaints to 440 complaints, there have been no new investigations?
I will take that on notice to be sure that I get that accurate, but that is what's in my brief. As I say, there's something, hundreds of those 440 complaints do relate to one particular organisation. So it might sound like a big increase, but actually, obviously quite a concerted number of, almost like a campaign of complaints were received.
Right. What can you share with us in regards to those 8 matters that regard that related to anti-Semitic or anti-Semitism?
That's actually quite hard to work out because sometimes it's not specifically referenced and it might be part of a broader number of complaints, but there were 8 complaints that had a particular reference to anti-Semitic behaviour that were raised.
Yes, okay. And how many charities have had their registration revoked as a result of these complaints?
None to date, sir.
None to date. But there are only 2 ongoing matters under investigation.
At this point, as I say, some have been referred to other agencies. And so in terms of our investigations, yes.
Right, okay. Thank you very much.
I've got a question. I'll go to Senator McDonald on revenue. Okay. I'll go to Senator O'Neill. Senator O'Neill.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I just offered you guys the call, but we'll go to Senator O'Neill. Senator O'Neill.
Okay, I'm not going to ask my questions if I'm going to be interrupted. Again, my tolerance for that is completely done.
Okay.
Right? So I expect the courtesy of asking my questions.
The Senator will be heard in silence. Thank you. Senator O'Neill.
Mr Dutton's claimed that Labor's investments in the APS have led to an expansion of what he calls loosely Canberra bureaucrats, but at the same time Labor has made significant investments in the ATO to combat fraud, identity theft, multinational tax avoidance and more. A range of initiatives that actually require skilled staff. Could you explain what's happened since Labor got to power and how have your numbers, your staffing numbers in Canberra changed?
I might turn to Chief Operating Officer Ms Curtis to go through in some detail, but the actual numbers in Canberra change very little. We have about ASL of about the high 1900s, about, stand to be corrected, but about 1900 in Canberra. Vast bulk of our staff are in other metropolitan regional areas, but just a bit more detail and I might turn to Ms Curtis.
Yes, I'm Jackie Curtis, Chief Operating Officer. That's correct. Most of our staff, in fact over 90% of our staff, are actually located outside of Canberra, and in fact we have actually seen a decrease in the number of staff in Canberra in recent years. As far as the investments in the task forces and the other measures that you have spoken about, we have seen an increase in our overall staffing levels of 1,100 ASL since the 22-23 budget.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification, because there is a concerted effort in the media at the moment to misrepresent the distribution of the public service across this nation. These are people who go to work every day to do something that they're proud of for their country, and they're everywhere. So the Canberra bureaucrat is a myth that's been very well punctured there. 90% of the ATO staff are in places other than Canberra. Could I ask you where you've seen the most growth of staff out of all of your offices?
Yes, Senator. We have seen the most growth in regional areas in Gosford and in Townsville.
Okay, so could you take me through the staffing increases in Gosford and in Townsville?
I can, Senator, but I might just call on my colleague who has more details around that.
Thank you.
We can keep the house in Australia. No, it's going to be hard to if you keep interrupting, Senator. Well, congratulations.
Have you got a name?
Achieved your goal.
So, Senator O'Neill asked to be heard in silence, which
she never grants that to anyone else ever.
Which I don't.
That's an absurdity.
I don't.
Senator O'Neill is the most disruptive senator that has ever been on this committee in my time in Parliament, by a mile. She interrupts every other senator every time.
Senator Bragg, I think
it's true.
Well,
I'm over it.
Senator Bragg, we're all.
I know that hearing information that is inconvenient for the Liberal Party in terms of regional jobs that you want to get rid of is deeply frustrating.
I'm not putting up with your appalling hypocrisy and appalling standards. Your disrespect for the institution.
Right. Okay. The ascendancy screams written all over this.
Okay.
Okay. It's a little bit.
Okay.
It's a little bit.
All right. Okay. Senator O'Neill. Okay. I think Senator Bragg made references to standards of behaviour there, and that's ironic at the moment. So Senator O'Neill has the call, and she deserves to be heard in silence. I think she's put a question that Ms. Stott was about to answer.
Yes, thank you very much.
We would love to hear from you, Ms. Stott.
Thank you.
Hopefully, you
Alison Stott,
about jobs for real Australians.
Alison Stott, Deputy Commissioner, ATO People. So the largest proportional growth has been in regional areas of Gosford. 21% of that site has grown by 82 people. Townsville has grown by 17%, which is 50 people. We've also had growth in some of our suburban areas, such as Parramatta at 11% with 162 staff, and Penrith at 6% with 42 staff. Yes, and Senator, I might just add for the record that the reduction in Canberra since December 2021 has actually been 14%.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Reduction in Canberra since December 2021 has actually been 14% to 189 people.
Thank you very much. And having lived on the edge of Sydney most of my life and now not far from Gosford, I know what that means to families, that they can find a safe, secure, well-paid job where they live, and they can actually participate in their communities. So let's be very clear about what these public servants are doing that the Leader of the Opposition wants to call Canberra bureaucrats. Completely wrong, in fact, and dismissive in terms of their contribution to the nation. Now, could you explain a part of the work that is happening with regard to these new staff? I understand there's a Phoenix task force. I'd like to understand what it does, why it's important, and how this is important in particular to small businesses that are complying with their obligations under law as opposed to those that are in breach of the law.
Thanks, Senator. Jeremy Hirschhorn, Second Commissioner, Client Engagement Group. So the Phoenix Task Force is one of our very important task forces which has recently been extended and expanded, as has a twin task force being the Serious Financial Crime Task Force. Now, what we find with Phoenix behaviour is that quite often there is theft against the tax system, and the ATO has to take action in relation to that theft, but also that the sort of business the sort of person who phoenixes a business or abuses a corporate structure is generally also, let's say, taking advantage of local suppliers and employees. Often super is not paid. And so the Phoenix Task Force and our work together with ASIC is very important in terms of a level playing field, and indeed making sure that subcontractors and other small businesses get paid for their work.
Sounds fair to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hirschhorn. It being 10 p.m, the hearing will adjourn. Senators do still have questions for the Revenue Group and also for Housing Australia, so the committee has agreed to spill over. The committee now stands adjourned.